Hello, it's Lexi at Cozy Tea Cafe on Bookstagram. Today we're going to be summarizing A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. It's the first book in a planned duology. Just a reminder, this summary is going to be full of spoilers. It will be in-depth plot points start to finish of the book. So if you don't want spoilers, don't continue watching. But this book starts off with Effie, who is an architecture student at the University of Lear. Her true passion is literature and writing, but women are not permitted in the literature college. She goes to the library to find nonfiction books on her favorite local author, Emrys Myrthen, but they've all been borrowed by an Argantian student named P. Hellery. Effie tells her roommate Rhea and Rhea's girlfriend Maisie that her proposal was accepted for the architectural redesign of Hiraeth Manor, Emrys Myrthen's family estate. Rhea says that it seems suspicious that they would choose such a young student, but Effie assures her that her dean confirmed it was legit. Effie observes a map, and we learn that neighboring nations Lear and Argant are at war with one another. Effie meets with her advisor, Master Corbenic, and asks him to sign off on her project at the manor. There's obvious tension between them, and we see a flashback of Corbenic making a pass at Effie and taking advantage of her. Corbenic says that he could have been fired, but Effie tells him that she didn't tell anyone. Effie knows that word got around because her classmates have been writing whore on her papers and taunting her. Effie arrives at the train station and doesn't see anyone there to retrieve her. She calls her mom, and her mom brushes her off and tells her to take her pills and calm down. Effie has a flashback of a doctor telling her to take her pills when she sees anything that's not real. The groundskeeper, Mr. Wetherell, finally picks her up and takes her to the manor, but on the way there they see a strange creature, and Mr. Wetherell brushes it off as a deer and says that there have been strange mutations in animals that scientists claim are nature's way of preparing for the second drowning. Effie feels suspicious about his response and thinks that he's hiding something. Mr. Wetherell drives her to the guest house and explains that Emrys's widow is a very private person and asked for her to stay in the guest house as opposed to the manor. The next morning, a boy named Preston meets her at the guest cottage and brings her to the main house. Effie sees P. Hellery written on his notebook and confronts him about taking all of the books from the library. She asks how he's left the university since he's Argantian and it's against his visa, and he says that his mother is Lyrian. Emrys's son, Ianto, introduces himself and gives them a tour of the grounds. Effie sees paintings of characters from Emrys's books, including the Fairy King from his infamous book on Harad. Ianto shows them a door that leads down to the basement archives, but says it's impossible to access because it's completely submerged in water. The next morning, Effie decides to leave. Preston finds her walking along the road in the rain and offers her a ride in his car. Preston reveals that he was asked to come to the manor by Emrys's widow. They get to Saltney, and Effie calls her mother and tells her that she's coming home. Her mother tells her that she doesn't want her to come home and tells her to go back to school. Effie doesn't want to go back to school because her classmates taunt her for the incident with Master Corbenic. She sees a man at the train station, and he makes an ominous comment about the manor. He says to beware of him, and Effie assumes that he means the Fairy King. He tells her to guard herself against him and gives her hagstones and tells her if she looks through them, she'll see him coming in his true form. Effie goes into the pub and sees Preston. He clarifies that he studies theory and he isn't a writer. She chastises him for being an Argantian studying Lyrian literature, but then feels bad about judging him for how he was born, knowing that people judge her for being a woman. Back at the manor, Effie tells Ianto her ideas for the manor, which mainly involve demolishing it and rebuilding. He takes Effie upstairs and shows her a platform overlooking the sea. Ianto tells her more about the drowning, which basically refers to this catastrophic event of a city being completely submerged in water, leading to most of its residents drowning. He explains that the drowning took years and people didn't take it seriously at first until it was too late. He says that the house cannot be leveled because it would disrespect his father's legacy, and she'll have to work with the manor as is. Effie snoops in Preston's notes, and he catches her. Preston explains that he doesn't believe that Emrys Myrthen is the sole author of his works, and his thesis aims to uncover the truth. Effie asks if this is an Argantian plot to weaken Lear, and he denies this and says that he's just looking for the truth. Preston asks Effie for help and says that he'll put her name on his thesis. Effie says no at first because it goes against everything she believes about her favorite author, but Preston asks again and says that Ianto trusts her, and her Lyrian name on his transcript would help his legitimacy. She agrees to help him and sees a page of his notes with her name scrawled all the way down the margins. Preston shows her some of Marathon's letters, and in some of them he signs his last name with a TH instead of a double D. Preston found that there's very little overlap in the language he used in the letters versus in his books, and he doesn't believe that Marathon wrote his books at all. The story of Angharad is also strange because it's supposed to be an epic romance, which was usually in the third person, but this book is in the first person. The Fairy King is both a lover and a monster, and the female protagonist is both heroine and damsel. Preston finds it suspicious that Ianto is cagey about his questions, and Effie wonders if there's something hiding in the basement. Preston says that there's no use in investigating because it's flooded, and Ianto has the key guarded. Preston asks Effie for blueprints to the house so he can look around for clues. Effie attempts to ask Ianto for the blueprints, and he invites her to the pub and expresses that he's suspicious of Preston. Ianto calls Effie beautiful, and she feels uncomfortable and asks again for the blueprints. He hands them over but aggressively grabs her arm and tells her that they're going. In the car, he asks why she's really there and says any professor would give her high marks because of her looks. She thinks that she's starting to hallucinate and remembers that she didn't take her pills. She sees that the Fairy King is sitting in the driver's seat where Ianto was, and he reaches for her so she jumps out of the moving car. When she walks back to the manor, Preston sees her and immediately helps her tend to her wounds. Effie hopes he doesn't ask about her missing ring finger, and he doesn't. He says that Ianto got back a half an hour ago, and he was acting strangely and went straight to his room. Effie doesn't want Preston to think she's crazy, so she doesn't tell him what she saw. They look at the blueprints and find a very small, narrow closet within Ianto's room, and they plan to snoop around in the morning when he leaves. Effie thinks she sees a ghost around the corner despite already taking a pill, and she thinks there is something strange about the manor and maybe the bottom 100 in general. The next morning, Preston and Effie sneak into Ianto's room, and they don't hear Emrys's widow next door at all, and Effie wonders if she even exists. Inside Ianto's room, they don't find any trace of Emrys, which they both find strange because he just died 6 months ago. Preston reveals that his father is also dead. They have noticed that Ianto adheres to old suspicions in and around the house, including rowan berries, iron, and mountain ash, which are all thought to ward against the fair folk. Behind the bookcase, they see a small room and step inside. They find a small box inside labeled E. Marathon with pictures and a journal inside. They see various photos of a girl around their age, and on the back it's written, "I will love you to ruination," which is what the Fairy King says in Angharad on their wedding night. They hear Ianto come back, so they take the diary and go to the study to read it. Within the diary, they read that Marathon brought Angharad to another writer, Colin Blackmar. He also writes in his diary that women are frivolous, and Effie begins to doubt his authenticity since Angharad is such a feminist and progressive book. Ianto comes into the room and acts like nothing happened yesterday, but then says that he's been very generous and doesn't want Effie and Preston cozying up together under his watch. Later, Effie goes to give Ianto sketches and overhears him talking to someone, saying that he had to get out and the house has a hold on him. He says that he had to bring her back like he wanted, and Effie wonders if he's talking about her. Preston and Effie start to work together only at night after Ianto confronted them. Preston wrote a letter to Blackmar asking him about his working relationship with Marathon, but it was opened and returned to the sender. Effie says he wasn't flattering enough and writes another letter herself. Effie asks Ianto if his mother wants her there, and he says that she's a very private woman, and then she sees that his eyes glaze over again like they did in the pub, and she leaves the room. They get a letter back from Blackmar, and he invites them both to his manor to discuss his work. She signed her name Euphemia, and Preston asks if she was a changeling child, since she was named after a saint. Effie says yes, and tells him her story. Her mother became pregnant young, and her grandfather fired her father and sent him away, back to the bottom 100. She was a terrible baby and child, so her mother left her at a riverbed, and the Fairy King came for her. He grabbed her hand, but her mother came back and pulled her away. The finger that the Fairy King touched rotted away, and that's why she's missing a finger. The Fairy King promised to come back for the rest of her one day, and he took her ring finger so no other man could claim her. Preston wonders if she could have lost it to frostbite, and Effie says that's what the doctors thought too, but she knows the truth. Preston doesn't believe her, but apologizes when she gets upset. Effie asks Ianto if she can get 2 days leave to get some architecture books with Preston, so they can really go and meet Blackmar. His eyes go back and forth between glazing and darkness, and he lets her go, but it seems like a struggle. Preston and Effie leave, and Preston says that he believes that Blackmar wrote Anharad, and also notes that it's weird that Mirathon always refers to the book as her in his letters. They meet with Blackmar, and he says that he met Emrys when he was hired on by Blackmar's father as his employee. Blackmar got Mirathon in contact with a publisher and helped him publish his first book, which wasn't a success. When they ask about Anharad, Blackmar gets cagey and says that they can ask the editor their questions tomorrow. Effie realizes she forgot her sleeping pills, and Preston offers to stay with her and sleep on the floor, but Effie says that they can share the bed. The next morning, Effie finds letters under the bed to a woman about poems that she wrote, particularly one about someone named Arethusa, and it's signed by E.M. Effie notes that Arethusa is the Fairy King's consort at the beginning of the book, and they also remember that the other letters said Blackmar's daughter showed poems to Mirathon. The next letter to the girl says that her father has found out about them and confronted Mirathon about her purity. The last letter recounts Mirathon and the girl sleeping together, and her telling him, "I will love you to ruination," which is a quote from the book, and also what was written on the back of the photos in Mirathon's hidden room. They think that proving the affair will, in a sense, prove that Blackmar was somehow responsible for Anharad. Guests begin to arrive at Blackmar's party, and they talk to the publisher named Marlowe. He doesn't have any answers for them because he inherited the company from his father and didn't publish Anharad himself. Marlowe makes a comment towards Effie, and Preston grabs her hand and says that they're together to protect her. They leave the party, and Effie cries as her perception of her hero crumbles. Preston comforts her and tells her about his father. He got in a car accident and survived, but had a traumatic brain injury. When he woke up, he didn't make sense and he became mean. He died suddenly, and the doctors realized that he did not have a traumatic brain injury, but hydrocephalus, which is swelling in the brain, and it could have been treated. They arrive back at the manor, and the next morning, Ianto is not pleased. He tells them a huge storm is coming and the road will be washed away completely. Ianto tells Preston to leave so he can talk to Effie, and he calls her a siren and a seductress. Effie tells Preston that they need to leave before the storm so they aren't trapped. She says that they need to get into the basement, and Preston calls her reckless. Effie straddles him, and he stops her. He says that he cares about her too much to continue and doesn't want her to think that he's using her, but he's wanted her for weeks. He tells her that he knows what her professor did to her, and she gets flustered and says that she didn't start it with the professor, that he took advantage of her, and Preston assures her that he believes her. The next day, Effie sees Ianto outside, staking trees down in preparation for the storm. She gets his jacket for him and slips the basement key off his neck while helping him into the jacket. She meets Preston at the basement, and she heads down while he holds the flashlight. She grabs a padlocked metal box and brings it back to the surface, and it's labeled Anharad. They take the box to the guest cottage as the storm starts, and they sleep together. They fall asleep, and when they wake up, they panic to leave as the storm gets worse. Effie realizes the photos and journal are still in the house, so they go inside to get them. When they get to the study, Ianto is there, and he says he received a call from Blackmar telling him about 2 students who were asking suspicious questions about Anharad's publication. Ianto has their transcript, the journal, and the photos with him. He called the school and pulled their files and found funny business between Effie and her advisor. He also found that both Effie and Preston are fatherless. Effie begs Ianto to let them all go before the storm destroys the manor and kills them all. Effie and Preston try to leave, and Ianto points a musket at them. Ianto tells them a story about townspeople sacrificing fatherless children to save themselves from the drowning. They realize that Ianto plans to sacrifice them and try to save the manor. Ianto opens the door and lets water rush in as he chains Preston. Ianto reveals to Effie that he always planned on keeping her there, knowing that no one would notice she was gone, and he said that he's been waiting for her for 12 years. Ianto kisses her roughly, and when he pulls back, she shoves the hagstones in his face. She looks through the last hagstone and sees the Fairy King where Ianto was standing. The Fairy King says if she gives herself to him, he'll be kind and make her a great queen. Effie says she'll go with him if he saves Preston. Effie kneels before him and grabs a glass shard and holds it up so he can see his reflection. When he looks at it, he starts to decay and turns to dust. Effie finds Preston with water up to his shoulders, and they can't remove the chains. As the water rises above their heads, a figure rescues them, and Effie sees that it's Anharad. Anharad is the mistress of the house, Ianto's mother, Mirathon's widow, and Blackmar's daughter. She said that Yanto was lost to the Fairy King, just like Emrys, and reveals that the stories are all real and she wrote them. Just like Effie, no one believed her about the Fairy King. She met Emrys at 18 and their affair began slowly. She wanted someone to read her poetry and her father was cruel, so she turned to Emrys. Emrys slowly turned into the Fairy King completely, and she isn't sure if it was Emrys or the Fairy King who got a hold of her manuscript. Emrys, her father, and their publisher confronted her and said that Emrys would publish the book as his own and receive the fame, while her father would receive all of the royalties from it, and she would marry Emrys to avoid scandalizing the family. And Harad surrounded the house with rowan berries, mountain ash, and iron, not to ward off the Fairy King, but to keep him contained within the manor, which is why Yanto became so squirrely when he left to go to the pub with Effie. When Emrys died, the Fairy King latched onto Yanto. And Harad invited Preston there to uncover the truth, but the Fairy King lured Effie in an attempt to protect her, and Harad had her stay in the guest house away from Yanto. Effie brings the box forward, and Harad is shocked, thinking it was lost forever. She opens it with a key from around her neck, and it's her original transcript. And Harad gets her own apartment and thanks Effie for freeing her. Preston and Effie return to school, and they show the dean their manuscript. They say that they will only give their manuscript to the school if Effie's name is on it, and Master Corbenic is fired. The dean says that he'll have to admit Effie to the literature college, and reluctantly agrees. Preston tells Effie that he heard bells outside of the manor, and asks if she ever heard them too. That is the end of the book. I'm assuming the second one will just kind of pick up right where this leaves off. I do have a couple more summaries planned for the rest of the month, but if you have any other books that you'd like me to summarize, particularly fantasy books, before the next one in a series comes out, just leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get to it. But thank you for watching.